when I was diagnosed, I had abandoned myself in a way that my grandmother and mother had not. Hola! Welcome to Sana Sana podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Lopez Tomei. I'm a first-generation Cuban-American woman, breast cancer survivor, and mother of 5. I'm also a certified professional coach. Sana Sana is dedicated to you, Hispanic and Latina breast cancer survivors who've always been the strong ones and now feel lost in their identity after cancer diagnosis. Every week, I'll be sharing the foundation of my ecosystem of healing coaching process, which I use to help my clients restore trust in their bodies, release perfectionism, advocate for themselves, and live from a place of healing and peace rather than survival. Tune in to hear my real-life experiences, carving a new path for myself after remission, but helping my coaching clients carve a new path for themselves too. Hello and welcome back. Thank you for being here. This episode of Sana Sana is about the women who made me. So come on in and let's talk about our mothers. First, I want to talk about my mother's mother. Her name was Demetria Ventura, and she was my abuela Ventura. She's from a small town in Camagüey, Cuba, and she and my grandfather owned a farm there. She raised chickens, and she had her own vegetable garden, and she was a woman of great faith, very hardworking woman. She had a 6th grade education, and when she was in her late 40s, she and my grandfather and their youngest daughter, my aunt, left Cuba. And they left everything behind, everything they'd ever known. She was born in Cuba, raised in Cuba, married in Cuba, had her kids in Cuba, so she'd never been outside of Cuba. And she, my grandfather, and my aunt came here to the United States. They came in through Miami, Florida, through the Freedom Tower. They were processed there, and then they were resettled to Atlanta, Georgia. She didn't speak English. And in her late 40s, she got a job at a factory in Atlanta. It was a factory that made drapes or curtains. And she spent 20 years working in that factory before she retired. And her work involved her being on her knees all day. And from what I remember, what I understood, her part of the manufacturing process involved pulling fabric across this like out of a big machine or into a big machine and across these big long tall tables, and that's why she was on her knees all day. And she never complained about what must have been a really hard and grueling job. And because of that work and spending every day on her knees for years, her knees eventually gave out and she had to have them both replaced. I remember her walking around straight-legged, both of her legs straight, because the cartilage in her knees had completely worn out, and she couldn't bend her knees. And she walked around like that for a little bit of time before deciding to get her knees replaced when she was 80. And at that point, when she went to the doctor and they told her, like, this is the only thing that's going to help you, her response was, bring it on. Let's do it. Let's get new knees. And my abuela was like that. She was fierce and fiercely independent, and she hated to bother anyone for anything. She did everything herself, for her family, for others. And when she was in her 70s, she was diagnosed with hormonal breast cancer, so the same type that I was diagnosed with decades later, but at stage 1. So it was caught early because she was still getting regular mammograms at age 70, or in her 70s. And so that meant, because it was caught so early, treatment was less invasive, although she did opt for a single mastectomy. But she didn't have any chemo, she didn't have to have radiation. And I was a teenager, more towards my late teens at the time. And what I remember is when I saw her mastectomy scar for the first time. And I remember being fascinated, not terrified or, like horrified. And It wasn't so much that I was fascinated by the scar itself, but the fact that she wasn't ashamed by it or of it, and she didn't seem to feel bad about it. I never asked her that question, but the way that she presented just seemed to, like, she, and my mom always told me this story, and recently when I talked to her about it, she repeated it. She said that when she talked to the oncologist, and the oncologist, I guess, offered her as an option to have a mastectomy, she said, let's do it. Let's get rid of it. Even though it was stage 1, and she did. No reconstruction. She just said, get rid of it. And she used to joke about her missing breast. My grandmother was a strong woman, and she was quiet, but when she spoke, she used strong words. I'll say that. And she had like a little spark of mischievousness in her, and she loved to joke. And she sometimes joked about her missing breast, about having a scar, and it felt like she used humor to take control of her cancer narrative. And like she was the strong hero of her own story. And to her and to me and my sisters, my mom, and anyone who knew her, especially at that stage in her life, that scar was evidence that she had stared cancer in the face and was still here to tell us about that, about having had cancer and having had a mastectomy. And here she lived to tell the tale. And so even though she didn't let it define her, it did define her strength. I don't remember thinking of her as a breast cancer survivor. And again, I'm sure that's a function of how old I was at the time and, self-absorbed in my own teenage life and whatever worries I may have had. But she just went back to being my grandmother, just stronger in my eyes because she'd gone through another unimaginable experience after having left everything behind in her country of origin. And she just seemed to kind of shrug her shoulders and move on, stronger than ever. So Abuela Ventura lived to the age of 92. She did not die of breast cancer. She died of old age. And I love her and I miss her every day. She was a badass. So what I inherited from her was her strength. I think her ability to stare hard things in the face and move through them. She was a woman of very strong faith. So I absorbed how to be a strong woman and a woman of faith from watching her. There were 2 distinct times, of the day. If you were with her, you could see her with her rosary beads in the mornings and in, the afternoons or early evenings. And that fierce independence. And I say it was a refusal to ask for help. I also think it was an inability to ask for help because of the way that she viewed herself as a strong woman who had to hold it together, make sacrifices, take care of others. That came with her too. And I'm so grateful for how much she loved me and how she modeled strength and resilience and unconditional love and faith. And I also had to sort through what lessons to keep of the lessons that I learned from her, from observing her, from growing up around her, her strength, her faith, her resilience, and which ones to let go of, although that would come much later during my own cancer journey, including that refusal or inability to ask others for help, especially when you most need it. And, like I said, cancer kicked that process off for me, and maybe it's the same for you. Maybe you've always been the strong one. You've always taken care of everything and everyone at work, at home, in your family, with your parents, with your siblings, and now you've been diagnosed with cancer and you need help. You need people to help you because you can't take care of everything and everyone and yourself at the same time. I want to say coaching can help. Coaching helped me. It helped me decide moving forward what lessons I wanted to take with me from everything I'd observed growing up, from life with my parents, with my mom, with my grandmother, and for my own life. What do I want to keep? What do I want to leave behind? What's helping me? What's not helping me anymore? What's not going to help me anymore in the future? What boundaries do I want to draw? What relationships do I want to strengthen? Which ones do I need to let go of? What things have I outgrown, if anything? What things do I want to grow into? These are all questions that you can explore, that we can explore in coaching. So let's talk about my mom. My mom is the one who carried me out of Cuba. I like to say, whenever I talk about my parents' immigration story, that I have one as well, because I was made in Cuba, born in the USA. And I was at my mom's the other day, and I was sitting at the dining room table and working on this podcast, and I glanced up and I saw her sweeping. And you might think to yourself, why is this remarkable? I sweep, people sweep all the time. Definitely my mom is always doing some chore or some housekeeping or something around the house, even at her age. But it's remarkable because my mom took a nasty spill in December and broke her right shoulder and her humerus. She had to have surgery to replace her shoulder and to put a steel pin in her humerus, and she had to have physical therapy and is still in physical therapy. And in many ways, she is almost as good as new physically and mentally. She's also 87, and she has Parkinson's. So she is strong. She's strong, guys. And that is not even the story I want to tell you about today that will really demonstrate how strong she is. And there are a lot of stories that I can and will tell you about how strong my mom is. But that day at her house, when I looked up and I saw her sweeping, I thought, my mom's also a cancer survivor. Not breast cancer, but she's also a cancer survivor. It kind of like struck me. I'm talking about my own cancer diagnosis and being a 10-year survivor and everything I've learned, and establishing my coaching practice to help other cancer survivors, talking about my grandmother being a breast cancer survivor like me, same type of breast cancer. And I just had it zoned in on the remarkable reality that my mom is also a cancer survivor. She was diagnosed with malignant melanoma, which is a type of skin cancer, when I was in my early teens. She was already seeing a dermatologist for regular checkups because she had, as they say, abused the sun when she was young. And during one of those regular checkups, the dermatologist noticed a birthmark on her leg that didn't look right, and he biopsied it right on the spot. And it turns out it was cancer. It was skin cancer, the bad kind. Amazingly, he cut deeply and wide enough that he got all the cancer in his office that day, and he saved her life. And I didn't appreciate what all of this really meant at the time, just that my mom had cancer, but that the dermatologist had cut it all out, so she didn't need any further treatment. And mom went about her life, which included taking care of me and my two sisters, my dad, her elderly parents, my dad's mother, my paternal grandmother, who was also an incredible and amazingly strong woman. And she did all this without missing a beat. She still sees a dermatologist once a year and gets checked, full body checked, to make sure that there are no other birthmarks or anything on her, no recurrence also of her malignant melanoma. And she's told me that, especially in those early years after her biopsy and diagnosis, when she got screened more frequently because she had so many birthmarks, that for years she worried before each appointment about recurrence or about a new melanoma popping up, which is a very common experience for cancer survivors, especially if you go into remission. You think about and you even worry about recurrence. And it tends to fade with time, but that worry is always there. And I just thought, yeah, I mean, my mom had this experience as well, different cancer, different stage, different treatment, just like my grandmother and me and her, but we have this common thread that connects us. And like my grandmother, my mom, she's a very strong woman, very hardworking, likes very fiercely independent, likes to take care of things herself. And I think that's the thing that upset her the most about falling in December, was that she needed to be taken care of 24/7. And she really was not happy about that. I think she was less happy about that than about the fall and about the fracture and the surgery, because she had to rely on other people and she had to ask for help, which was really hard. Again, it was a refusal or maybe an inability, like my grandmother and like me.
Hi, I'm a 10-year breast cancer survivor. And when I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, I hadn't had a mammogram in 4 years. I thought I could wait. I couldn't. For Latina and Hispanic women, breast cancer is the leading cause of cancer death, and we're often diagnosed later when it's harder to treat. But early detection changes everything. Today, the guidance is simple. Start mammograms at 40 and don't skip them. And while self-exams aren't a replacement, knowing your body helps you catch changes sooner. So if you've been putting it off, this is your sign. Schedule the mammogram. Know your body. Advocate for yourself, because your life is worth that appointment.
There's more. So at the beginning of 1969, while my parents waited for their exit visa from Cuba, they found out they were pregnant with me. And the timing was terrible because they were waiting for permission to leave the country. They'd lived in, under the communist regime for 10 years, and they'd been trying to get out the whole time. And now they were getting closer to that reality, to achieving that. And here she is, finds herself pregnant. And about 5 months into her pregnancy, in the middle of food shortages and acts of repudiation that were being carried out by the authoritarian regime against Cuban citizens like my parents that were trying to flee communism, my mom went into preterm labor. And she was ordered to go on bed rest and spent the next 3 months in bed, which, if you know my mom, you know that was a supreme sacrifice for her, because she does not sit still for anyone or anything, not for shoulder surgery recovery, not for Parkinson's, not for skin cancer treatment, not for anything. So just to imagine that they ordered bed rest and that she took to bed, had to be fed, her hair had to be shampooed like from the bed, everything was done for her, and she had to just be in absolute bed rest. I just imagine what a huge sacrifice that was for her. And she ultimately carried me to freedom when she was 8 months pregnant. She told me that when she and my dad were finally on the plane, which they were able to get on the plane even though she was 8 months pregnant because she hadn't been eating a lot and her belly was much smaller than what an 8-month belly looked like, pregnant belly looked like. She was able to lie and say that she was only 6 months pregnant. And that's why she was allowed to fly. But she told me that when my dad and her were finally on the plane flying away from the only home that she'd ever known, she felt such relief that she didn't look down to see Cuba one last time. She was like, goodbye, I'm done, which is an act of mental strength from my perspective. And she never looked back. She was never interested in going back. She never looked back. And so my abuela Ventura and my mom, her name is Elena, modeled the same thing in different circumstances. You survive by getting up and not making a big deal. And I am so grateful for the strength that they modeled, physical and mental. They knew maybe instinctively that the only thing they could control was how they reacted to the unfortunate events that they found themselves in. And they chose the reality in many ways, and that reality rejected victimhood, self-pity, pity from others. And at the same time, they also taught me not to bother others with my own needs. My own needs, their own needs were secondary or tertiary, or even, for me, my needs were like at the bottom of the list when it came to like my health and wellness. And that asking for help meant you were burdening someone else or were risking losing control. of, the outcome of a situation. So this brings me to August of 2016 when I was diagnosed with stage 3 hormonal breast cancer, which is the same type as my grandmother, but more advanced. And when I was diagnosed, I had abandoned myself in a way that my grandmother and mother had not. They got regular screenings, they went to their medical appointments, and they caught their cancers early, which is when treatment tends to be less invasive and long-term outcomes or survivability are much better. And so some similarities and, some differences, but thankfully I had their roadmap, their cancer roadmap, if you will. And part of that is that they survived and they came out strong on the other end. And I also had to find my own way through because stage 3 is not stage 1 cancer. So I took what was helpful and, again, had to reflect on what I needed to leave behind in my own experience. And so my mom, my grandmother, and I all experienced hard things. That's the thread that ties us together in terms of our cancer experience and our health and wellness. And I like to think that I inherited their resilience, their strength, their ability to endure, and how to have a sense of humor in the face of hard things, even though this is a humorless topic that I'm covering today. But what I had to examine more closely, and I think I've said now a few times, but it bears repeating, is, and what I had to decide whether to keep or not, was the belief that asking for help meant that I was a failure somehow, that that was a weakness of character or of me as a woman, as a wife, as a mother, that asking for help or relying on other people to do the things that you're responsible for, the things that you control, including yourself, somehow undermines your independence. Because, I don't think I've said that outright. And you all, many of you don't know me. Many of you who are listening don't know me. If you do, you know that I'm fiercely independent to a fault. And that surrender is not in my vocabulary. And that is something that is good. And I appreciate that characteristic in myself. And also, too much of a good thing is not good. So I had to examine more closely those things and the belief that part of being strong means keeping quiet, or that silently suffering is its own strength somehow. And that's the thing that cancer taught me, that I can choose my thoughts and my reaction. My mom and my grandmother taught me that as well. I can change the story. And I have 2 daughters, one who's 32 and one who's 25, who need to be very aware of this medical history on their maternal side. They've got a breast cancer, their maternal great-grandmother and their mother are breast cancer survivors, and they carry this history. And they are aware, and they've talked to their, at least my older daughter of the 2, I know has spoken to her doctor about my medical history. And my younger daughter, I'm not sure, but I've spoken to her about the importance of sharing that medical history so that she knows what to be on the lookout for, what to be aware of, and when to start her own screenings. So they carry that history, and they also have the example of their abuelas, their grandmother and great-grandmother, who got screened, went to the doctor for regular physical exams and for well-woman exams. And I also want them to take their example of strength, of survival, of faith, an example that I hope and I do think that I model for them as well, thanks to my mom and my grandmother. And I also want them to let go of perfectionism, which is, I think, where some of this need to control, this inability to ask for help comes from. There is some perfectionism in there for sure, like only I can do this, only I can do this right, or somehow this is mine, this is my responsibility, so I need to do this and I can't ask for help. I want them to let go of that, the perfectionism and that inability or that refusal to ask for help, to spread the love of taking care of themselves and of others, and that I don't know if it's an inability, but that practice that I had of putting other people's well-being ahead of my own. I wasn't afraid of going to the doctor when I got diagnosed with breast cancer in 2016. I had, starting with, when I turned 40, I got my mammogram. I had like 2 or 3 before, I had 2 or 3 before I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I just, life happened. I had a baby, I was breastfeeding, I had a super long to-do list. I had the mammogram order. Every time I went to see my gynecologist, he would give it to me, and I would write it on my to-do list. And when I would go reach for the phone and to make the appointment, I would think, I don't have time for this right now. I'm fine. I'm okay. I don't have time for this. Move to the bottom of my to-do list. And my daughters were younger. 10 years ago, obviously, my eldest was in her early 20s, though, late teens, early 20s, and then my younger daughter was in her mid-teens, So they knew enough. They were observing me, and I don't want them to learn that lesson. I want them to unlearn that lesson, and I want them to, yes, have that example of strength and survival and of faith. And what I hope they will learn from my own example is something very simple that I repeat over and over, is that if they don't take care of themselves, if they don't prioritize their own health and well-being, even if in the face of all the things that they're responsible for and the people that they're responsible for, they won't be able to take care of anything or anyone else. So I hope this podcast will do the same for women everywhere who are facing a diagnosis and treatment. I want this to be the place that helps set the example that my Abuela Ventura and my mom were for me, and that this space is also where these women, you, can hear that it is okay to ask for help. That while it's okay to be strong and resilient, you don't always have to be the strong one, and that, whenever you're ready for that conversation, I'm here as your coach. And now that I'm a survivor with my own scars, I can't imagine having faced diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship without my abuela's and my mother's example and strength. The first week or so after my bilateral mastectomy, my mom is the one who bathed me. She's the one who helped me clear out my surgical drains. She helped me go to the bathroom. She helped feed me. And she saw me cry. She was with me when I saw my mastectomy scars for the first time after surgery, when I looked at myself in the mirror, which I could, barely stand to do. She was in the bathroom with me. And I carried my grandmother with me during that time as well. I have her rosary, the one that she carried with her every day and that she prayed with every day. And I took that rosary with me to doctor's appointments, to every chemo treatment. I clutched it before and after surgery. I took it with me to 28 radiation appointments. And so the women who made me gave me everything I needed to survive, and they're still teaching me how to heal. And so until next time, I wish you healing and hope. Sana, sana, hermanas. Thank you for being with me today. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Sana Sana, the show that helps you heal and restore the parts of your ecosystem that were depleted after a breast cancer diagnosis. If you liked the episode, please leave us a rating and review so we can reach more incredible survivors, como tú, who want to heal with us. If you want to stay connected with our growing community, check out our Instagram at Eileen Lopez Tomei Coach and share what part of the episode touched your heart today. See you next week.